one country, two systems. One system relatively free, the other slave. In the end, the solution for Hong Kong and Taiwan and the United States of America and lots of other places is, and obviously it's a lot more focused on Hong Kong and Taiwan, but is for China to become a more free and democratic country. And that's hard to see that happening, but that needs to happen. It's difficult to see how, if China continues with over 1 billion people and with economic and military might, to be a rotten totalitarian-esque society, with the esque, questionable. It's hard to imagine how Hong Kong will survive even until the 47 turnover, or change, in which it becomes one country, one rotten slave system. And of course, China continues to this day. This summer, there were numerous stories, the Chinese basically saying that they could come take Taiwan whenever they feel like it, and that it is part of China and it should be under their control. And of course, Taiwan, when we were younger, Taiwan was China, and China was the People's Republic of China, and we've continued to support as a country Taiwan, but of course we don't recognize it as China, and a lot has changed, but during all this time, it hasn't been as much of a focus in our foreign policy as it once was, but it is a country that's probably the freest country in Asia, certainly in Southeast Asia, and has a democratic, competitive political system, representative democracy, has direct democracy, has initiatives that people can bring forward. I'll tell you what, not a bad place to live. And of course, Hong Kong, you look at their governmental system, and it was screwy when the British were had their colony. It's been screwy since, in terms of any normal type of suffrage for the individual, and it's not nearly as free and democratic as Taiwan, in my estimation, but it does have, and has so long had, relative freedom, that the idea that you're living in a free society and that's about to change is a very, very scary idea. And so that's that those it's kind of interesting to think that you have these outlets of freedom that are so vulnerable and threatened.
So it's This Week in Common Sense for the last week of September 2019. And though you have 5 pieces on common sense, this is commonsense.com this week, you're talking mainly about Hong Kong, probably for a good reason. You're going Far East.
I am flying to Hong Kong, and then I'm flying on from there to Taiwan for the 2019 Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. We've held these around the world. Citizens in Charge and the foundation co-sponsored it when it was in the United States in 2010 in San Francisco. And I've been to forums in Montevideo, Uruguay, and San Sebastian, Spain, and Rome last year. And this year it's in Taiwan. And it'll be my first foray to Asia. But I think I'm most excited to visit 2 of the freest places at the moment in Southeast Asia, Hong Kong and Taiwan. And so it's Both of them have had strong movements for democracy, have gained greater democracy. Hong Kong's got a tougher, time right now because, of course, they're looking 20 years down the road, and they are going to be, um, then no longer, one country, two systems, one relatively free, one slave. It will be two countries, one rotten, evil, totalitarian-esque system. And to be living there and to see that coming, no wonder they're protesting. And with five demands, all of which make sense. And there's been some controversy because of the protests, and there's been violence, but the violence has been overwhelmingly on the police side. And of course, at the end of the day, what these protesters are asking for is to not be totalitarianized, to not have their entire lives taken over by the state. And China, for years it was communist China. It doesn't quite seem communist in the way that we traditionally think of that today, but it is every bit as totalitarian. And it's something that as they gain in power and economic might, I think if you are frightened in Hong Kong, it makes sense. If you're frightened in Taiwan, it makes sense. Uh, but I think it's good to be frightened everywhere, and not just frightened of the terrible Chinese government, which it is terrible, but to be frightened of a move back away from democratic checks and balances, a system of freedom of speech. One of the things in Hong Kong that they do have, even though they don't have universal suffrage, they don't have a truly representative system, right now at least, they have freedom of speech. And in America, we're fighting over whether, oh, but can you say things that'll be hurtful to somebody? The biggest light we shine for the rest of the world is our adherence to the First Amendment and to the right to speak out politically and to say things that aren't popular and to say things that offend people. Because if you can protect that, then you can protect enough speech to be able to hold your government in check. And that's the age-old problem. Maybe the first problem was anarchy and no organization, and all of a sudden we have government, and now the problem is government too powerful. Whether that was the king or the junta or the people's deputies or the Congress or the president of the United States, the more somebody gets power, the more dangerous it is. And, it's not about hating politicians. It's about recognizing history and seeing from where we came. And it's frightening to think we're stepping back. It's talked about economically sometimes that, uh, we might not have it as good as our parents, and the idea that you can tell progress because my kids are going to have it better than I had it, that sort of thing. And when you don't feel that way, that's scary. Well, you know I can't think of anything more important than the heritage that we have in the US of people who believe in freedom, who still say, hey, wait a second, you can't do that. I've got a right, and on we go. That impulse that is so still alive here is embattled. And it's embattled here. It's embattled in an existential. Here, how about a decent, correct usage of that in a sense. Our freedom to breathe and stay out of prison is not as threatened here as it is in Hong Kong, but it's still threatened. And there, boy, is it threatened. And of course, Amnesty International has just come out with a report saying that we mentioned in our commentary, uh, that says there's been torture, that they've got numerous instances of reports of torture, people being detained and tortured in detention. And there's that picture of the policeman, this was weeks ago, who pulled his gun because he was under, he was in a bad situation, surrounded, it seemed like. There's a photo, this is maybe a month ago, but at the airport, near the airport or in the airport in Hong Kong. And of course, you can look at the dynamics of crowd control, and the police are trying to do this, and there's been vandalism, and there's been this, and but at the end of the day, you've got one side that says we want basic human rights, we want government that's accountable, we want an investigation of what the police have done here, we want freedom and democracy. And you have the other side who says we want you to do what you're told, and we want to control your lives, and we want a society in which you are simply a cog uh, in the greater wheel of the state. And that it's just so stark there. And of course, it's interesting because Taiwan is, as people our age, I think Taiwan was a much bigger deal diplomatically, politically, before Nixon went to China, and the thaw in relations between the U.S. and mainland China. But in the time since it was more of a big deal in our foreign policy, they continue to develop democratic systems. They're probably the leading country in Asia that uses initiative and referendum. They have a dynamic representative government where people are elected and the parties are competitive. Seem to be a lot more competitive than in the U.S. And yet without recriminations and bitterness, and not that there haven't been problems, there always are, but it's really kind of a light for the rest of Asia, in terms of this is how a government, this is the direction to go. And to think that we all hear and read in the paper the kind of pressure that Hong Kong's under, but Taiwan, our entire lives, has been under that same sort of pressure, that at any time you could be taken over and totalitarianized.
Wonder though, we don't hear much about Taiwan. You remember when we were kids, like in the 1960s, Taiwan was in the news all the time, it seemed like. I mean, I remember it talked about when before I was 10. Now I don't know if I can remember it being on the news.
No, very rarely. And in fact, I think the one of the times this summer when there was some talk, because China had kind of blustered that if Taiwan holds a referendum on independence from China, how dare they vote on how they want to live their lives? What kind of people would hold an election to decide the future of their country? I mean, come on. And but basically threatened military action, and has never taken off the threat of invading Taiwan, and claim that it is part of China. But of course, Taiwan has a little bit different history. I've just begun reading a book about Taiwanese history, with that the and I say just begun. I think I've read the foreword, but I'll read it on the plane. But anyway, the supposition is Taiwan is seen as part of China, but that historically it's had its own history, and has not really been a part of China throughout history. But either way, the truth is it could have been part of China for a million millennia. And if the people of Taiwan don't want to be part of China anymore, they ought to have the right to leave. In the same way that it's not as serious a situation, I don't think, but California, where they talk about an initiative to secede, which one's never gotten on the ballot there, but if I have a kind of a rule on secession, that anytime someone wants to leave, they should be able to leave with one exception. And that is if the reason for their leaving is to continue to hold people as slaves. That's not allowed. But any other reason that someone wants to secede and do their own thing, freedom is a good thing. Self-determination is a good thing. And the truth is, Hong Kong should be able to say and hold a vote and say, hey, do we want to be our own little tiny country that's a trading post and a mecca of economic energy? Or do we want to join China in 2047? I think I know how they'd vote.
On Friday, you wrote about was it a man named Ko in Taiwan?
Alex Ko. And Alex Ko is a young guy in Taiwan who, like all of us, what can you do to help in Hong Kong? And he thought of something. He went to his church and he started a campaign to raise money and has purchased and sent to Hong Kong over 2,000 kits of helmets and gas masks and things to protect them from the police. And I think that's great. I don't know what kind of how easy it is to get those into Hong Kong, but there's nothing violent about a gas mask or a helmet, or things like that, and protective clothing and so on. And with the way things have gone there, it just was heartening to see that the can-do spirit. It's hard not to see that shining through. And in essence, so often we're looking for our government to do something, liberate this country or put sanctions on. And Joshua Wong, who's the veteran 23-year-old protester in Hong Kong, and Denise Ho, who's a musician and democracy activist, has been blackballed by China because of her stance and her statements. They were both in the U.S. asking for help, asking for sanctions, and anything the U.S. can do to apply pressure. And there's all kinds of debates you can have about sanctions, and I think we tend to throw around sanctions a little bit in a bullying fashion, oftentimes. And I think there are times where in essence, just like you would go to war with a country, you would say, look, what you're doing, we may not send troops, but you're not going to be part of what we're doing. And that is sort of an act of war, something short of war. And I can see that. But the truth is, it's depressingly tough for governments to do the right things and not to be interventionist and then end up doing terrible things, but to have much leverage. And I think we've got to get to a point, and this is a discussion you and I have had many times, where we are now in a different era. The world is smaller. It's easier to communicate. We have to start communicating across oceans and across continents. And I think every American, I shouldn't say it that way. I hate when in the media they say everybody thinks. I think most people are very moved by what they see happening in Hong Kong, what they saw in Tiananmen Square 30 years ago, and that what they saw in the Arab Spring in a lot of places. What we want to see our fellow man free and able to live their lives, and we feel that connectedness. And I think that we need to create a world community that is not dominated by nation states who have their own agenda, and that agenda is, let's not say almost never, is never the agenda of the people living in that country. And I think that, and I'm not sure how to do it. I'm very I'm very honest. I'm clueless as to exactly how you make that happen. But I'm convinced the more people want to make that happen and understand the importance of having connected political and human bonds between folks that are geared toward protecting all of us and our freedom against government attack, that has to be done by us. We can't trust governments to do that. The UN, is not going to be the institution that keeps the world at peace. We need a people-based operation, a people-based system and organization. And maybe it's more of a system, I think, than an organization that allows people to help one another. Because it's amazing the sort of help, if people felt like they could write a check and get freedom for the people of Hong Kong. I think it'd be amazing how much money would be raised. Maybe we need to start buying ourselves out of slavery to countries with bad intent.